Our next presenter is an arts entrepreneur, and that's George Parker.
I'm a member of the Free Theatre Christchurch, which is the country's longest-running producer of experimental theatre. It's been running since 1979 continuously. In February last year, like many other organisations, we lost our working spaces. We lost our beloved theatre in the Art Centre, which was built by the original members in 1982. We lost our working space in Old Queen's Theatre in Hereford Street, which is demolished. But we met quite soon after the earthquake in February to discuss how we were going to respond. That we needed to respond. We needed to respond creatively. That's what we do. And our director, Peter Falkenberg, as he does, had come up with a project already about 2 days after the February earthquake. And it was in response to what was happening. In Sumner, at his home, that thing happened. People came around asking if they were okay, wanting to share food, resources, just wanting to share stories. And we know this happened all over the city. And Peter was reminded of a story called The Earthquake in Chile by Heinrich von Kleist. Basically, the story is set in 1647, the time of a monumental earthquake in Santiago, Chile. And the basic plot is that there's two lovers, a young man at the beginning, he's about to hang himself in his prison cell, a young woman who is about to be executed by the church because they've had an illicit affair and the birth of a child. And their doom's about to come, and boom, the earthquake. Everything crumbles, physical structures, social structures. Everybody evacuates the cities to the margin. The lovers find each other amongst the rubble and they decide to leave for good. However, they get to the margins of the city and they find everybody there in a kind of temporary city. That is, people helping each other to build structures, people sharing food together, people talking to each other, compassion, empathy, all those things. And so they decide to stay. So we felt that we wanted to create a production called The Earthquake in Chile and explore the Christchurch situation. This is the poster for the show. We had a guest coming from Wales, a guy called Richard Goff, and he is the director of the Centre for Performance Research in Wales, and he does a lot of performance research into the rituals of cooking and eating and their relationship to community, and he's explored this all over the world. So we wanted to incorporate that into the performance to explore what was happening in Christchurch. The next thing was the space. We didn't have our theatres, but for us, in some ways, we had an advantage. We're used to working in unusual, unconventional spaces. Often an idea, a question, a theme that we want to explore will suggest a particular space. We'll start working in the space, and then the space itself will direct what the performance becomes, will shape it. We don't know actually what the outcome's going to be until we've worked in the space. This time, St Mary's Church in Addington, beautiful wooden church with a lovely square around the outside. We went to the church and they very graciously allowed us to do the performance there. So when I say that the space influenced the performance, we started thinking about what we were going to do. Now, we put a Catholic-inspired mass in an Anglican church, and following the Kleist story, it was a Catholic-inspired mass, so we had, choir, and we had a reading, and then we had a sermon that built upon the reading, and in the sermon, we introduced the story of the von Kleist story, and we also made, albeit subtly, some comments about Christchurch before the earthquakes. And the really important thing to understand here is that the audience here is not just the audience sitting in the theatre at a play. The audience here is playing a role. The audience is the congregation, the audience is the community, and we played on that throughout the performance. After a simulated earthquake in the church, the audience and the performers went outside, were ejected from the church, and went through a series of performance stations around the church. There was a night market, a chaotic night market. Then they went into a series, a kind of tented village, where the performers presented various reflections and ideas on what had happened in Christchurch, but also what might happen. You have here two of the lovers from the performance, talking about the loss of and the memories of favourite restaurants in Christchurch. You have some nutter beside them who's remembering the loss of a favourite building in Sumner that housed the ruptured duck and the loss of heritage in the city. You had a whole range of things from the comic through to the tragic, various reflections and imaginings of what the city might be. The idea was that if the performers did this, it would invite the audience to start thinking in the same way. The next station was a kind of around the bell tower at St Mary's. There was tables set up right around and the audience sat around it and they had to collect food together. It was a kind of game, so it was crazy, and if they couldn't collect the food, well, they just didn't eat. And then they were taken into another tent in which there was a long table right down the middle, and they were asked to share with their neighbour what food it was that they ate straight after the earthquake, or if they hadn't been here for the earthquake, what sort of food they ate after a crisis. And they had to do this while they were feeding each other. Jelly. It was very intimate. It was very moving. And in many ways, the performance could have stopped right there with this kind of utopia of community. But that's not how it happens in the Kleist story. They were taken, the audience, back into the church. They were given biscotti, fortified wine. They were asked to take their seats again as part of the congregation. In the Kleist story, the community comes back into the city. They come to the church at the centre of the city and they have a mass. And the old morality, the old problems of the past come back, but this time with a real prick of a vengeance. And the young couple are killed. So we didn't want to finish like that. We wanted to have something that was slightly more ambiguous, perhaps. And really what we wanted to say was this amazing sense of community that emerged. Maybe it made us realise that Christchurch, how conservative and isolating it could be beforehand. How do we not go back to that? And how do we take that sense of community that we experienced, how do we pour that? How do we make that the foundations of the city? The response to the performance has been extraordinary. It's still getting responses. This was in October last year. And people commenting on the fact that, for example, one person mentioned to me recently, sort of whispering, I wish I could go back to those first 2 days after the earthquake, because at the moment I'm not feeling it. But we've decided, building on the success of that performance, we're actually now working to a performance, Canterbury Tales, which would see the audience as the pilgrims moving around the city, guided by floats and giant puppets and masked performers to performance stations in the city. And in those performance stations, there will be artists from different disciplines collaborating together, taking a tale from Chaucer and reimagining it in relation to Christchurch. Because the thing about Chaucer and the Canterbury Tales is that he wrote it in a time of great upheaval, and it was with a view to trying to engage with and understand the situation. And to me, very passionately, I believe that that's actually what the art's about. They're not just fits and giggles and distractions from our everyday life. They're not just a way of sort of covering up the cracks and being all nice and pretty. They are a way of engaging with our lives. They are our life. They are a way of living. So that's also an ethos behind a project that I've been trying to develop, that something like this, I guess, these projects could be seen as on the way to a project called the Art Circus, which is a series of transitional structures that would house a range of arts, hospitality, markets, and interactive environments. The idea is that it's meant to be inclusive. It's meant to invite people. It's not just for the arty crowd. It's not just set away in one part of the city, but it actually could spread out through the city. And it actually, yeah. I didn't know how I was going to finish this. And I don't know how I'm going to finish it, frankly. I think there could be a different version of the city, and Ryan's already touched upon it, that it has to happen in the here and now. And if we imagine a city that is based on what its citizens want, and it fits in with what you were saying just beforehand, builds on what we make it now, then something special might happen. But it has to happen through collaboration, through the ethos, the creative ethos of collaboration. That's it, really.
Thanks very much indeed.